Very interesting. So I have the pleasure of talking to somebody I've been dealing with for 20 some years, who's
Yes.
Tom Petite of the Comic Opera Guild in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Good afternoon, Tom. If you
Yeah.
could tell me how you got to start the Comic Opera Guild.
Pardon?
Tell me how you started the Comic Opera Guild.
Oh, well, the Comic Opera Guild was begun as a sort of a, what shall I say, an escape from Gilbert and Sullivan. When I got to the University of Michigan, I was singing in art class, and a young lady said, hey, why don't you just do something with that other than doing it in here? So why don't you go audition for the Gilbert and Sullivan Society? And so I did. And all the rest of my years at Michigan, I was in the Gilbert and Sullivan Society. After I graduated, there was this big letdown, and I wound up actually getting a job. I got married to a young lady who was also, who I met in the Gilbert and Sullivan Society. So we left the U of M area, and I got a job in Detroit, which is not that far from Ann Arbor. So we were very bored in Detroit, so we went back and started doing shows again. And then eventually, through a bankruptcy of the company that I was working for, I actually wound up going back to Ann Arbor. And in a few years, I had done pretty much all the shows that Gilbert and Sullivan wrote. And so we said, well, why don't we do some shows other than that? But the Gilbert and Sullivan Society is made up of students who don't stay more than usually 4 years. So they never do get to do all the shows. So they weren't interested in doing that. Therefore, we started a company to do it. We started by doing little non-Gilbert or non-Sullivan shows, little one-act operettas, and then eventually said, well, we might as well do the big shows. And so we decided to start a new company, and that's how it got started. Our
This
first
was
show,
1974 you started?
First show was in 1974. It was a double bill of Bastien and Bastien by Mozart, and a short operetta by Gilbert called Ages Ago. And it did not do well at the box office. And so by the time we were done with that, we were several $1,000s in debt, all of my money, as a matter of fact. And so we said, well, we got to do something big. If we do something big, we might make the money back. And if we don't make the money back, that'll be the end of it. So we did Die Fledermaus, which you may know is probably the most famous operetta in existence. Did it on a shoestring, spent very little money, had a well-known opera diva play the lead, who was teaching at U of M, as a matter of fact, at the time. Had some great singers, put the show on, made some money, paid off the debt, and we just kept going from there.
And did you just run some facilities? Have you used the same facilities, basically, or have you gone from place to place?
Well, basically in Ann Arbor, there is no civic theater. The university is the proprietor of all of the theaters that are used, the big theaters, the good theaters. And so we've been in a theater called the Lydia Mendelson Theater, which is in the Michigan League. And we just simply rent, whatever facility we're going to be in. We've been in that facility mostly. We were also in the Michigan Theater, which used to be a big movie house, 1,700 seats, big place. Did that for about 7 or 8 years. Then that became too expensive, so we had to move to another place. So we've been a nomadic group. We wind up trying to, rent whatever space we can get at the time. We did the Mendelssohn again most recently about 2 years ago, but now we're in a place called the Riverside Arts Center. So we move around. We don't have our own facility. And so
What is the seating capacity of the Riverside?
The Riverside's only about 100 seats. It's changed over the years in terms of what we've been able to do. We did actually come close to filling the Michigan when we did Kismet and when we did Showboat, but with audiences today, you could not do those shows. Just not enough people coming to theater anymore, so we've had to downsize to the kinds of audiences that we get nowadays.
Well, what kind of ticket prices have you charged through the years?
It's about $20 for adults, 17 for seniors, and sometimes 12 or 15 for students. Not a very high ticket price, but that's the going rate in Ann Arbor.
And you recorded all of these, but initially you did not have a definite intention of what you were going to do with the recordings. Is that correct?
Well, right. I mean, I always wanted to document everything we did, and we didn't just record it on some kind of a wire recorder. I always had a good recording system that we used, and so even today, 40 years later, we sell copies of that very first show that we did in 1974 because the audio quality that we were able to produce was fairly decent. Only in the last 20 years have we been able to produce videos that are, professionally done. Before that, they were pretty much any amateur who had a camera, and in many cases, the person using the camera wasn't very skilled.
Right.
So
takes a little practice. Takes practice.
We don't offer those for sale unless somebody really desperately wants to see them. But anything from about 1996 on, we make copies of those.
And give us an idea of how many you have done that are available on your site and also the Footlight Records site.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give us the number of recordings that you have available, and the key ones are available at Footlight also.
I'm losing the volume here. I'm going to see if I can't jack it up. I don't see where that's possible. So
I was asking for the number of recordings.
Oh, how many we've done? Well, like I say, we recorded all the shows that were mostly European operettas, which we did our own translations for, so that we always assumed that we did it as if we were writing the show from scratch, because typical translations are very, hard and fast. They try to do it exactly as the original words, and it just doesn't translate very well. So we tried to make these shows something that an American audience would appreciate today. And so we figured that it was important to record these things, and so we did. We really didn't do it with the intention of making a lot of sales, because back then everything was done on tape, and it really wasn't a good way to sell recordings on tape.
So at one point it was cassettes. You were selling cassettes.
We did sell cassettes for a while, but it wasn't a big market. And
so the DVD era was good for you. The CD era, CDs were much better for you, because collectors do not like. There's a collector myself. Collectors do not want a cassette if there's another alternative. They will reluctantly take a cassette, but it's not like it's not like an LP or a CD. So you started in the 90s. You started transferring some of the cassettes to CD.
Well, we've transferred everything now to CD, but we started, recording Broadway shows in '03 because our music director at the time was very much interested in doing that. And so we started with
who was that? Let's give him some credit.
And we eventually did some more Kern shows. And we did the same thing. We simply recorded them because we always do, but then we found out that people wanted to get copies of these, which we hadn't expected. And so then we began to actually print these commercially and sell them. And that was quite a new thing. We hadn't really seen that before. And so that kind of began our new business of doing Broadway revivals.
And so it's basically Kern and Herbert are your big
Kern and
two.
Herbert, that's where we started. And then we morphed into Frimmel and Sousa and a number of others, you know, other composers, Hoshna, Hirsch, that were, you know, contemporaries, of course, of Herbert and Kern. And what we decided that we would do was to make recordings and revivals of shows that were now in public domain. It's much more difficult to deal with, you know, royalties. And so with the costs of royalties, we decided that we would try to keep it in shows that were 1922 or earlier.
It's a 75 year, is that the time frame in general?
Yeah, the copyright laws have changed over the years. You know, it used to be 28 and 28. You get 28 years and you could revive it again for 28 more. But Disney changed all of that because Mickey Mouse, I think, came around in 28. And after a while, of course, they couldn't renew it anymore. And then we wound up with the copyright law of 1978, which extended it again. And then it went through several more extensions. And then finally, they changed it to more like the European copyright law, which is, I think, 75 years from the death of the composer or the writer, either one. And so if you were doing something in 1935, you would still have to look up and see who is collecting the royalties for that.
And what was the first show you did of Broadway? Was it a Kern show?
No, it was Herbert. Very first one, I think, was the Red Mill by Herbert. And we did these in concert, which is where we've done most, of course, but our music director was rather ambitious at the time. And so over the course of 3 weekends in a row, we did 6 shows, which looking back upon was absolutely...
6 different shows, not the same show 6 times.
Right, all different shows.
Like repertory.
2 different shows per weekend for 3 weekends.
You've been talking about this director. Let's give him some credit. Who is this gentleman?
Yeah, our music director was Adam Acito, and he now really is the country's expert on Herbert. He's done a great number of revivals, gone to the Library of Congress, pulled out all of the existing materials on shows that were never published, and has tried to reconstruct those shows. So a lot of the ones we've done most recently were ones that he's had to actually put back together because the rental companies are very casual about shows that were no longer popular. And they didn't really care what happened to the materials. They would send them in a box to either the University of Wisconsin or the Library of Congress. And anybody interested would have to go in the back room and dig through these boxes to see what was there. And in many cases, they were prompt sheets. Sometimes there were no prompt sheets. They were just scores, orchestra scores with a few pages of this and that. It's quite a task sometimes.
You'd have to look somewhere for a program and then see if you could match songs in the program to what you had.
Yeah, he would try to find original programs to see what songs were in this production or that production. Of course, a lot of times the original production might have been on the road, off Broadway, and then they added songs or subtracted songs when it got to Broadway. And he would try to find some of these lost songs or find which ones were actually done on Broadway and which ones were cut. And in many of the recordings we've done, we've had an addendum, songs that were actually not done on Broadway, but were in the original production or in the original score.
So the attempt is to record every song you can find.
The idea was to record everything from that show. Yep. It wasn't to worry about whether this would be produced this way on stage. It was mainly for collectors who wanted to hear what was in the original show.
Even a cut song.
Adam and Pat Johnson were roommates, and they were duo pianists. And so in all the recordings that were done while they were here in Ann Arbor, it was always a duo piano accompaniment. And
What was the first Kern show that you did?
Let's see. The first one, I can't remember now exactly the order in which they were done, but Oh Boy has probably been our most popular of the shows, and it was one of the first ones we did. Oh Boy, and then there's Oh Lady Lady, Very Good Eddie. Those were all among the first ones we did.
Cat
We
and the
did
Fiddle?
four of them.
Was Cat and the Fiddle around then too? Cat and the Fiddle?
Cat and the Fiddle was done later. We did a number of years where we would do some Herbert shows, and then we would do some Kern shows until we had done probably 20 or more Herberts and about 10 or 12 Kerns. And at a certain point in that progression, Adam and Pat both left Ann Arbor. Adam went to California. Pat Johnson became a professor at Michigan State. And in the past, I guess, 8 years or so, we've brought them both back to record shows over the summer. So some of the shows that we've done recently, the Herberts, have been done in the summer, bringing them back to try to finish all the Herbert shows. The Kern shows are harder because they were never published. And he has, I think, only 1 or 2 that he's worked on that we haven't done. At some point, perhaps we will, but
do you recall the ones?
They're much harder to, apparently much harder to get all the materials.
Do you recall the ones that are still in the offing?
Well, the one Kern that we were thinking of doing was called Toot Toot. And I think he hasn't quite finished that one. He hasn't got all the materials for that. And then this summer, we were supposed to have done Oui Madame, and I forget now what the other one was, but there were a couple of Herberts that were done and that were written in the 20s, rather late shows that really began to sound more like Kern, you know, because Kern had really started a whole new way of doing musicals.
Herbert was really the first American.
Yeah, Herbert, you know, started off obviously as an operetta composer, as well as Sousa. Sousa and Herbert were busy in the 1890s bringing operetta to America. Prior to that, almost all the theater, or you know, musical theater was all imported from Europe. But they decided that they could write operettas as well. So Herbert, around 1895, they both began writing operettas. And Kern really came around in 1917 with several shows that were all at the Princess Theater shows, which were very different from the operettas. Now, the operettas were typically stories based in Europe because there were so many immigrants in this country that they loved to see things that had some, you know, relation to Europe. For example, the Red Mill was set in Holland, for example. And this was typical of operetta.
Student Francis Heidelberg.
Either that or they were set in some fictitious country, like Sousa had a country called.
You recall one that was set in America? How long that took to pick a American locale for one of these people?
Do I recall? I'm sorry.
An American location. When did they finally? Was it Kern that finally said?
Kern. Yeah, it was really Kern that did that. You know, Mademoiselle Modiste is in France. Naughty Marietta is actually set in America. That was one Herbert that was set in America, set in New Orleans. But in 1917, Kern set everything in America, and audiences went for that. That was new, that was big, and that became the style after that. So after that, most of the Herbert shows were also set in America. That was the big sea change in Broadway at that point.
What year did you start doing video?
Pardon?
What year did you start issuing videos?
Well, it's a rather unusual story there too. We had done La Vie Parisienne in 1982. And there was a TV producer in the audience who came up after the show on Saturday night and said, "When is your next performance? I need to film this." And we said, "Well, that was it." And so she said, "Well, we have to remount it. I have to film it." And so we said, "Well, that's unusual. Okay." So we actually took the show, kept it together for 2 months, set it in another theater in Michigan called the Croswell Opera House in Adrian, remounted it strictly for television. And they did a 3-camera shoot with 1-inch tape, which was the standard at the time, and did a complete shoot of that show. And then they started to edit it and ran out of money. And so the whole thing died on the vine until, I think it was when did we do that? I think 2000 or something like that. We decided we had to get those 1-inch tapes and get them transferred to DVD or they'd be lost forever, because by that time, 1-inch tape was obsolete. It was no longer being used by the industry. And so we did. We converted it. It was a bit of a difficult problem because there was some problem with the reels. They began to they were padded with foam, and the foam started to disintegrate, and they clogged up the 1-inch tape machine. So we burned up one tape machine, and then eventually we were able to get the whole thing put on DVD. So that's the earliest show that we have a recording of. But for the most part, it was 1996 when we actually started getting these shows professionally recorded. By that time, professional recording wasn't as expensive as it had been before. And there were companies that were able to do these recordings and do them rather well with multiple shoots.
A lot of high school shows are produced quite well, and there isn't much money involved. And in that case, they're generally done for the cast.
Right. In fact, that's what Gilbert and Sullivan has done over the years, is they make recordings and they basically sell them to the cast because there are so many good professional recordings of Gilbert and Sullivan shows that there's no market. The difference that we have is that most of the shows that we've done haven't been done by other people. And so the recordings that we have are still something people might want. And
Can
so,
you give us an idea of what titles we're talking about and who wrote them?
Of what?
Give us an idea of who wrote the material and the DVDs that are available.
Which DVDs we've done?
Right.
We haven't done them, of course, of the musicals and concert series. Those were strictly audio. But all the stage shows that we have done have been, since 1996, have been professionally recorded. So those are the ones that we sell. They're mainly operettas, because that's been our stock in trade over the years, again, with original translations. So they're all done in English. Everything we've done is in English. And they vary from European operettas. We've done a couple of American ones. We've done Orange Blossoms by Herbert. And let's see, what else have we got? We've done them. The El Capitan by Sousa. Those are a couple of the American shows. We've done English shows, Viennese shows, French shows, and those are the ones we have available on DVD.
You give us some more titles so people would know.
Well, let's see. Let me pull something out here. I don't don't know if you can see these. Poster of
Yes,
orange
good.
blossoms,
Okay.
the magic flute,
Okay.
we've actually done Carmen, which we did with dialogue, because Carmen was actually written with dialogue originally. Here's an El Capitan. A Night in Venice by Strauss, which is a terrific show that most people don't know much about. This is Robinson Crusoe by Offenbach. Kismet. We have more than one show recording of that. Let's see what else we have here. Oh yes, another American show, Babes in Toyland. And of course, The Merry Widow. Those are some of the shows that we have available.
And is it primarily you who does the translations, or are there other people?
The translations really have been done by 3 members of our company. Myself, I've probably written the most. I think I've written 13 or 14. We have, I think, 3 that were done by Ronald Orenstein, who's now in Canada. And I think 3 that were done by Gershom Morningstar, who was one of our stars back in the 80s.
And do you occasionally appear in parts in some of these?
Pardon me?
Do you personally sing? Do you ever have the lead role?
Oh, yeah. All of us have been lead singers, all 3 of us.
What is the triumph of your performing career?
I'm sorry?
What is the triumph of your performing career?
My triumph, or my favorite roles, I suppose I should say. Probably the Viceroy in La Pericole. That was a lot of fun. Doing the Wazir in Kismet, you know, a great villain, as well as Barnaby and Babes in Toyland. And one of the interesting things that, because we've done the Fledermaus so many times, you know, people know anything about the Fledermaus, a comedian comes on in the 3rd act and provides a lot of humor. He doesn't sing. He's simply a comedian. And I've played that role. And the interesting thing is that my wife has played the same part, which is, I think, is unique for us. I don't think there's a husband and wife team that I can think of that have done that. We also did the same thing in another show, The Gypsy Baron, where somebody, in fact, Gersh Morningstar was supposed to play the part of King Charles in the 3rd act, another speaking role, but he unfortunately was unable to do it. And so I said, well, I'll cover it. I was directing the show at the time. And my wife said, well, you can't do that because our son had some birth defects and he couldn't be left alone. So she said, well, you do some of the shows and I'll do the others. That way they'll always have one. And so we were double cast on that part as well. But I've appeared in probably as many as, I don't know, 10 or 12 of the stage shows, and probably I've been in 30 or 40 of the recordings. So I'm all over the place.
Anyhow, so that is good.
Of course, that's the reason we originally started the company, was to be able to perform. And as we went along, it became more than that. You know, it became.
But are there other people that could hopefully keep this going in the future?
Well, we have a board. We have a board, and they're committed to keeping it going. At this point in time, I don't have anybody to replace myself, because I've been the managing director since the beginning, which is now, what, 46 or 47 years. don't have anybody yet who's come to the fore who's able to do that. So we're still looking. We'll hopefully find somebody to be able to take it over.
What is generally the size of the cast? What's the number of people in most of these shows?
Well, back in the 70s and 80s, you typically had a chorus of about 20. You'd have maybe 10 principals and an orchestra of about 30. So that.
And is this the way the shows were originally? Is this pretty much the way they were originally done?
Well, yeah. In the original, in the early years, all of these shows were done pretty much with the number of personnel they would have had originally. As time went on, some cases we would have to cut down. We might have a more reduced orchestra. There might be a case where one person might play two roles in different acts. But for the most part, the stage shows always had anywhere from 20 to 40 people involved. The concert shows, typically, the ones that we recorded, were all done with principals. They were typically did not have chorus singers. They were all principal singers. And so, for example, when we did that run of 6 Herbert shows, one person might have been a chorus member in one show and taken a principal part in another show. So all the Herbert, Kern, and early Broadway shows that were done were all done with, for the most part, principal singers. Only recently have we done a few where we actually had chorus people who were not soloists, but most of them were done with soloists. And so those typically were anywhere from 14 to 18 people.
And are there sometimes young people that are doing these shows?
Pardon?
Are there sometimes young people, quite young people?
Yeah, well, for the most part, in the early years, many of them were students at U of M, because we were so connected with U of M. A lot of them were singers at the music school at U of M. Later on, people from other colleges, including Michigan State, Oakland University, would come in and perform. So it was always a blend of younger people and townies, I guess you'd call them. Always a volunteer chorus. So those people would be anywhere from 30 to 70. Lots of age differences there. In recent years, choruses still are, I suppose, older, anywhere from 40 to 70. But a lot of the principals, again, are younger people who are either students at music school or have already, they might actually be church soloists. They might be people who have gone and had a career and then have done something else and still want to perform. So it varies. Typically, the principals have been younger. The chorus has been oftentimes older. Although in some shows that we've done, the chorus is a blend where we might have the older people singing and not moving much. And we would have a little dance troupe of the younger chorus members who could actually still cut the rug.
Has anyone else been performing along with you all these years? Do you have a contemporary who's been around from the 70s and is still?
Was the question if we still have people from the early years?
Right.
Yeah. I think at the moment there are about a half a dozen people who were in the first major production we did, was Die Fledermaus in 1975. I think we've still got about a half a dozen people here in town, and they still perform with us. So, it's an interesting thing. We've had people who've stayed, for 4 or 5 years. But Ann Arbor is a bit of a transient community. A lot of times people move on. So they would stay and do as many shows as they could while they were here and then move on to wherever they were going from that point on. But we've tried to keep as many involved who are still in town as we possibly can.
Over the years, have you had any dealings with William Balcom and his wife?
Well, you know, yeah, Bolcom and Morris are supporters of our company. We've, for many years now, since the year 2000, have been holding a vocal competition. And I have been asking Joan Morris if she would be one of our judges. Unfortunately, every time it seems to come around, Bill is doing an opera somewhere and Joan has to accompany him. So they've had to leave town and she hasn't been able to join us yet. But we, in this vocal competition, have professors, vocal teachers from different colleges act as our judges. But I've wanted to get Joan in there because Joan is not just a singer, but she's always been a cabaret performer. And she's very big on acting. And our competition is unique in that it requires the singers to act as well as sing. Just singing will not win the prize. They have to be able to sell it. Because that is really one of the main things about light opera and musicals is you can't just get by standing and singing. You have to be able to sell it and be a character and make it work on stage. And so that's what we make them do if they want to win the prizes. And so Joan was going to be, and hopefully at some point will wind up being one of our judges.
Have any performers go on to do Broadway?
Yeah, we've had a number of singers who have gone on to careers. A number of them, of course, who won the competitions have gone on to professional careers, some at the Metropolitan Opera, a number of them in other companies. We've had a number of our singers who have gone on to careers in Europe and the United States. Haven't followed all of them, but we get word back that a lot of them, you know, come back and tell us what they've been doing over the years. Many of them, after, you know, this many years, it's been 40 years or so since they may have performed with us, are now teaching. We have, I think, 2 of them who performed with us who are now professors of music and voice at the University of Michigan. So, yeah, many of the soloists have gone on to professional careers.
You should be proud of that too. But do a lot of people go to the University of Michigan to study opera?
Well, you know, back in the 70s, the University of Michigan School of Music did not have a great reputation for voice majors, but that changed over the years, and now it has a terrific reputation, not only for the University of Michigan opera performances, but also the theater department, which mainly does musicals, Broadway musicals. I mean, they do some of the best stuff that you can imagine. It's very, very professional. And so the people who are going to U of M are very, very, very well-trained singers. And we've been lucky over the years to get a lot of them to come out for our shows because they're not being paid. Our company is strictly volunteer. And so to do a show with us, you have to want to do it. But a lot of singers have gone through our company and done more than one show because it gives them a chance to do something they wouldn't be able to do anywhere else. And that gives them great experience. In fact, one of the singers that sang with us for 3 years, Nada Radakovich, went on to a career in Europe and has been one of our judges. He's back here in Michigan now, has been one of our judges in the competition and tells everybody that being in our company and doing those shows gave her a big leg up when it came to auditioning for opera companies that she went on to sing with. So, you know, what we like to think is that by singing with us and having to really act and do something more than just stand and sing gives them an advantage when they want to go out and become a star in an opera company.
What kind of rehearsal period is needed to put these on?
Well, we would typically rehearse 3 times a week, and that would go on for probably 3 months.
Is it evening so they could do school and other things?
Pardon?
Is this in the evening?
Always on the evening. Yeah, Sunday evening, usually Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We would not have chorus there every night. Typically, the chorus would appear twice, and the principals would appear twice and overlap once. And then with the concert performances and the early Broadway shows, we've had to condense the rehearsals quite a bit, so that in some cases we rehearse the show. The singers actually have to learn the material on their own, because as I mentioned before, they're all principals, so they all are able to learn their own music. And then we would have 3 or 4 days of intense rehearsals for maybe 6 hours a day, and then we would record the show. So the stage shows typically required, a long period of rehearsal, whereas the concert shows were very, very short, intense rehearsals.
And most of these are just one performance?
Usually we would do more than one. In a number of the early Broadway recordings, there was only one performance. But after that, we would oftentimes do more than one, because it became obvious that unless we wanted to stay there all night and make corrections, then it would be better to do more than one performance. That way you could put the two together and get a correct recording. So for those concerts, typically there's more than one show, and then you put together the thing to make sure that everything is correct. Now with the stage shows, they would typically be performed 5 times in the early years, and at least 3 times more recently.
Well, do you have anything else you'd like to tell? This is going to be on YouTube, so what else do you have to impart about comic operetta?
I think there's only one thing we really haven't talked about with regard to what we've been doing over the years. I mentioned that we did original translations, and so what we felt was that there really weren't good English versions of many of these European operettas. And for that reason, they are not very well known. And so our goal was to make English versions that were superior to the original, at least as good in the case of a very good show, but superior to oftentimes what was the original show. For example, Offenbach, one of my favorites, of course, had some of the greatest writers in France working for him. And his shows were very well constructed, very fun.
Hello? Tony, do you have Wi-Fi? He said, I'm almost done with the thing, but now it's frozen.
Yeah, it's skipping in and out.
To be a problem, so. No, I pay. I can talk for 24 hours. Right, my daughter's with Wi-Fi things too, so maybe in a day or two, we'll just do the last segment you talk about, and you tell them that these things can be rented from you. That would be a good thing to tell people. Good.